Hi guys, so today we're going to be talking about shin splints again. This is the second part in our two-part series on shin splints, and today we're going to be talking more about treatment. Last time, if you check out the previous video, which I'll post a link in the description to this video, we talked about the pathology, how it develops, where it comes from, why it happens in the first place, and today we're going to dig in a little bit more into what you may be able to do about it if you are having trouble with shin splints, or some things you might be able to do if you want to try and avoid it, if you've had trouble with it in the past maybe. And we're specifically going to focus on running technique and those running technique errors or things that might predispose to developing shin splints or make it worse if you do have them, okay? And then from there we'll lead into sort of how you would use improving those aspects of your running technique in order to address the problem. So, just a quick recap over the pathology, right? We've got the shin splints is inflammation or irritation in the periosteum, which is that outer layer of the bone. And we're talking about the tibia, which is our shin bone, okay? And what happens is if the loading of that tibia is more than the tibia can adapt to, then that outer lining becomes inflamed, becomes irritated, and becomes painful. And what we're really talking about here is something called exhausted adaptive capacity, right? Which sounds a little bit technical, but if you imagine the sort of total loading in a given week, the total load placed through the tibia and the forces that that tibia experiences during a week, if that's in excess of the tibia's ability to adapt to that, or its adaptive capacity, then you will get some sort of stress reaction, which is shin splints in this case. So basically, when we have the total load for say the week in excess of the adaptive capacity, then we're going to have shin splints, okay? If we have the adaptive capacity of the tibia is beyond the loading that week, is able to tolerate more than that, the tibia is able to adapt to more load than that, then you won't get shin splints, right? Does that make sense? So, let's take that out. So that is how you get shin splints. The total load that you put on during, say, a week is in excess of the adaptive capacity of that tibia, as in how much load that tibia can adapt to before you'll irritate it and cause that irritation and inflammation in the periosteum, the outer lining of the shin bone. So you can go check out that other blog and video if you want to sort of learn a little bit more about pathology. Now, the total load, if we talk about like a unit of time, right? So we'll usually think in terms of per week, right? So the total load placed on the tibia per week is a combination of all the loads that tibia has to sort of deal with, including sort of walking around, standing, that kind of stuff. But we're going to think about running, right, specifically. And basically the total load is going to be a product of the, again, total load is the number of steps that we take as we run, right, multiplied by the load per step, right? Which is pretty simple, right? So the amount of load that tibia has to adapt to depends on how many times it's loaded and how much it's loaded each time, how much force it experiences each time. You'll notice I use the word load and force interchangeably, and they're the sort of important variable here when we talk about shin splints. And the number of steps I talked about before, when I talked about, the body's capacity to adapt, how you might manage your training volume and alter it in order to make sure that you're not running too much in excess of your adaptive capacity of all your tissues, right? That's probably a primary way of avoiding running injuries in the first place. So I'm not going to talk so much about that today, but I am going to talk about the load per step, okay? The load per step, if you put a high amount of load on your tibia with every footfall, then obviously your total load is going to be higher. Does that make sense? So if you take a given number of steps, say you do, 20k one week, that takes a certain number of steps. I'm not going to guess how many, okay? And then if you take 20k worth of steps and multiply that by a high load per step, so you're putting a high load on the tibia every single step, your total load is going to be high. If your total load is too high compared to the adaptive capacity of your tibia, you get shin splints, right? So if we can reduce the load per step and manage the amount of steps we take, so that's something we've talked about in the past, then our total load for that week will be lower, and hopefully it will be less than the adaptive capacity of the tibia, right? And then we will not develop shin splints, okay? So the load per step, basically there's a term in research that they talk about a lot called ground reaction force, okay? So every time I run, I land on my, say, left foot, right? Land on my left leg, I exert a force on the ground by sort of coming into contact with it from a height, and then the ground exerts an equal but opposite force into my body, right? And that's called a ground reaction force, and that ground reaction force is absorbed by all of the tissues of my body. Tissues are my muscles, ligaments, tendons, bones, joints, and all that kind of stuff, okay? And the tibia, the shin bone, is one of those tissues. Now, if I land very hard and make a kind of bang as I hit the ground, I'm going to experience a higher ground reaction force, okay? So ground reaction force experienced by the tibia depends on how quickly I hit the ground, okay? It's something called, they use the term vertical loading rate in the research, okay? What that means, it sounds technical, but what it means is cushioning, right? So if I stand on my one leg here, and I just hop up and down, I'm not going to make much noise as I hit the ground, okay? And the forces experienced by my tibia and all the other tissues of my leg are going to be relatively low. Now, if I don't bend my knee this time and just land, okay, I'll do that again. And you can probably hear there's a big thud, right? And there's a kind of shock that runs up my leg. And that's a very high ground reaction force. And the difference is the first one, as I cushion, I bend the knee and I cushion into the ground, I slow the loading down, the rate of loading, I slow it down so that it sort of dissipates. It's like the difference between punching the wall with your bare fist and punching it with a boxing glove on, right? It'll sort of soften the blow by slowing down the rate of deceleration, I think. And it's the same, I remember when I was a kid, we used to go climbing trees, and when we would jump out of a tree, we would sort of automatically drop and roll, right? And what we were doing was kind of intuitively lengthening the amount of time our body's tissues absorb that force over, making it longer to add some cushioning. And what we were doing was decreasing our vertical loading rate, right? We were loading the tissues more slowly, and that reduced the force that they experienced, reduced the ground reaction force. Okay, so hopefully that wasn't too technical. But basically what they do in the research is they look at runners who have high vertical loading rates, which basically means that they're thudding each time they hit the ground. I've talked about this before. Runners who kind of, thud along when they run. They have very high vertical loading rates, high ground reaction forces, and in theory they may be more predisposed to developing problems, particularly like shin splints, which is a stress reaction of the tibia, or stress fractures, which is like the end stage version of shin splints. So what we want to do is try and reduce our vertical loading rate, right? We want to land more softly, right? And there's a few running technique things that you can do to try and land more softly, and then your load per step will be a little bit lower. And then you might be able to have your total load a little bit lower, and if it's lower than your adaptive capacity, then your shins won't hurt. Or you won't develop shin splints, sorry. So anything that makes us softer and quieter when we run is a good thing. It's going to make the vertical loading rate lower, right? And this is what they're looking at in the research at the minute is, can we train people to run in a different way where they'll reduce that vertical loading rate, which will reduce the stresses and forces experienced by the tibia, and will that reduce the overall load and help them manage their shin splints or eliminate it? So, get to the point. Anything we can do to run more gently will potentially help do that, okay? So there's a few things we can look at. The first thing is just to change our technique by trying to run more softly, and that's a cue that I'll use with people. I'll get them run on a treadmill and say, I feel like they're whacking the floor really hard and they've got a high vertical loading rate. I'll just say, try and run more quietly or run more softly. Or imagine you're running on hot coals, right? Imagine you don't want to wake someone up as you're running. Yeah, these are little cues that you can use to try and soften your landing, and then you try and integrate that into your running technique. So that's one way of doing it. So I'll write these down. So we go run softly or quietly is the other one. Softly / quiet. So that's one thing we can do. The other thing we can do, which is a way of trying to achieve this, to try and reduce our impact a bit more softly, is to increase our cadence. Now this is a little bit more theoretical, but in theory, if you increase your cadence, the vertical loading rate per step will decrease, which means that you'll just be running more softly, right? So if you increase your cadence, which is the number of steps you take per minute, then your loading rates in your leg will decrease. There's conflicting evidence on this, okay? Some studies found that increasing people's cadence didn't do that, and some studies found that it did. So we're at a little bit of a wishy-washy place in the research right now, but generally the thinking is if we increase our cadence by about 10%, so say increase cadence about 10%. So if say your running cadence, like you look at your Garmin and it's like 160 or something like that, then you would add 16 to that, right? 176 will become your target cadence, right? So you're basically looking at what your current cadence is, and I talk in the blog that I've written, which I've put in the description to this video, about how to do these things. But basically, if we try and increase our cadence, we'll potentially reduce our vertical loading rate. Now, what I will say here, I said just now that there's conflicting research, right? And it's because sometimes when I get people to increase their cadence when I'm working on a running technique with them, they actually start hitting the ground harder, right? I don't know exactly why that is, but they just do seem to do it on that particular cue. So the end goal is to run more softly. And if you try, run on a treadmill, increase your cadence by 10%, and if you feel like you're making more noise, then that's maybe not the best cue for you if you're trying to address shin splints, right? Because the goal is to land more softly, right? Because we want the load per step to go down. So that's another thing. Another thing that is proposed is forefoot strike running. And I'm gonna, add a bit of a caveat here that I don't ever use that as a cue. Right? I don't tell people to land on your forefoot, midfoot, or heel. I don't find it helpful practically in the clinic. It doesn't. The trouble is when you just change someone's foot strike, none of the other variables that we're trying to improve work, or not work, improve. So if you say you had a rear foot striker, right, with a low cadence, which we want to increase, who's running very loud, right, which we want to decrease, you get them to land on their forefoot instead of their heel, and all that happens is that the way they angle the foot as they hit the ground changes, but everything else stays the same. So they still run with a low cadence. The cadence won't increase usually, but just by asking them to do that. And they'll still remain just as loud, maybe a smidge quieter. So I don't find it a particularly helpful thing, but I wanted to touch on it because it's something you might read about, that forefoot striking may help you reduce that vertical loading rate. My personal opinion is that it matters more where the foot strikes the ground, in terms of not far out in front of us, we want it under our centre of mass, so not overstriding, and how we kind of cushion that impact, in terms of if you land on the heel, do you sort of land gently on your heel and soften that impact, and then it doesn't matter as much, what part of the foot hits the ground first. But I did want to touch on it because it is something that's been proposed. The last thing is not, it kind of is a technique, but it's not a technique change. But running more slowly, right? When we run faster, the forces go up, right? So as we land when we're sprinting, there's a much higher force experienced by the tibia than there is when we are running slowly. So if we run slower, the load per step will go down. If the load per step goes down, we can potentially take more steps before our total load exceeds our adaptive capacity. So the idea being, if we slow down a bit, we might be able to do more running overall during the week. And by trimming out some of those faster interval sessions or hill sprints or something like that, particularly downhill, like if you're running fast downhill, the loading is very high in the tibia. So running slow is another thing that we could do to kind of try and manage our loading and bring it below the adaptive capacity of the tibia. Okay, so this all sounds a little technical, so I'm just going to try and sum it up, okay? If you get any given week, if you put more load through your tibia than it can adapt to, then the outside layer will get inflamed and will become irritated and you'll get shin splints. There's some ways that you can reduce the amount of load that goes through your tibia. One of them is to manage how many steps you take, which is to manage your running volume, right? The other is to manage how much load goes through your tibia, or how much force goes through your tibia on each of those steps. If we're going to do that, some of the ways we might think about doing it are trying to run more quietly, maybe increasing our cadence by around 10%, considering a 4-foot strike, although I'll put it maybe by that, and potentially running slower as well so that the forces go down. So ways to manage shin splints, these are some strategies that you can consider from a running technique perspective. You also want to manage the amount of running volume you're doing. Okay, hope that makes sense. Leave any questions or comments below. Cheers.